There are pressing issues and big plans across the state transportation system, from the effort to replace the I-5 Columbia River Bridge to the delays and canceled trips linked to limited staffing or mechanical issues with the state ferry system, as well as congestion relief projects and overdue maintenance on roads around the state. Hello and welcome to The Impact. I'm Mike McClanahan. This time 2 years ago, transportation projects were top of mind for state lawmakers who were dealing with a surge in revenue. This year, lawmakers are facing big cost overruns for some major transportation projects, as well as the federal court mandate to remove or replace stream clogging culverts that block salmon spawning routes. In addition to the infrastructure concerns, there's been a steady increase in fatal accidents on state roads in recent years, with the death toll reaching numbers not seen in decades. In response, some state lawmakers have pushed for new enforcement mechanisms to discourage speeding, with an emphasis on highway work zones. Last year, the House and Senate passed a bill with overwhelming support in both chambers that will put automated speed cameras in highway work zones starting July 1st. This year, there are bills to spell out how the work zone speed cameras will operate, and bills to expand the use of traffic photo enforcement systems beyond construction areas. House Bill 2356 and Senate Bill 6115 would each modify the penalties for violations and conditions around how those work zone cameras are used. House Bill 2384, sponsored by Democratic Representative Brandy Donahue of Mill Creek, would expand the authority of cities and counties to put up speed cameras. Still ahead, the Democratic chair and ranking Republican member of the House Transportation Committee weigh in on the speed camera bills and what the budget problems will mean for major transportation projects in the pipeline. Stay with us. Joining me now, Chair of the House Transportation Committee, Representative Jake Bai of Tacoma, and the ranking Republican member on the committee, Representative Andrew Barkis of Olympia. Thank you both for your time today. Representative Bai, I'd like to start with you and the transportation budget. Lawmakers come into this year with some potential budget challenges related to projects that are planned but have come in to be more expensive than planned. What's the status of the transportation budget-related issues?
Well, we have 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats that have been sitting down probably 6 hours a day going through the situation we're dealing with, which is pretty exceptional in terms of compared to where we were when we did the package in 22. We're finding ourselves, because of labor shortage, contractor shortage, supply chain issues, difficulty of projects, finding ourselves substantially with cost increases that are very difficult to solve. And so one of the things that we did was we sat down and figured out how we were going to deal with these situations. And you know, we have Connecting Washington, still some elements of that there for projects, and we have Move Ahead Washington, and we're really talking road projects and ferries here. And basically what we agreed was, when we did those commitments, those were dollar commitments to projects. And we want to be fair to all those who not only voted for them, but advocated for them, that those dollars remain on those projects. And so that makes it difficult for when you get cost overruns, and I think our way of doing it, I think makes sense, is that you're going to have to scale these projects back. We can't take a bunch of money and move it from one project to another, because you can't do that and be fair to the other projects. So whether it's ferries or culverts or Portage Bay or 520 or the Gateway project down in my neck of the woods, those were dollar commitments, and we want to honor those dollar commitments and not move money around from one project to another. We've got to stay with our commitments to all the members and stakeholders that supported those packages.
And before we transition here too, are any inkling of what the scale backs might look like and for which projects?
Well, I think the biggest one is Portage Bay, and in that case, it's probably going to be, I mean, obviously we have to negotiate with the Senate, but it's looking like we do a portion of the project with the funds that we have available. So we don't have $700 million to move on to the project. Now, we might be able to do some things that make that less of a amount of money, but basically, in my mind, it means we're going to phase that project. We're not going to do the entire project in one time.
We started working on the issues back in May, June. I mean, right when we got out of session, we continued to work. And when we received our first indication that one of the projects, 405, was going to be several hundred million over, we thought, okay, we know how to do this, how to work with this. But then it just kept coming. Then, a month later, we get one on 520 that's now, X amount, 800 million, and then another one that's $1 billion. So it's made it very difficult. What we always do is we work on our priorities and our principles and the way we're going to do this budget. And so working within our means, we have those commitments. We worked very hard over the last several years to program in the dollars that we were told were necessary for these projects, including 520. And so we can't just accept, well, this is the way it's going to be, we need another $700 million. That just doesn't happen. It's very, very difficult. And the solution that we saw last year, that I'm glad didn't happen in the governor's budget this year, was the solution to backfill was to take money from other projects or push projects way out into the future. And that's not fair to the commitments that were made previous. So we're working very hard to look at these, working with the contractors, talking to the Department of Transportation to say, look, we have $700 million. What can we do with the dollars that we have today? What phase of the project can we do today? How are we going to approach this in the future? So I think we are committed to these projects. They are going to continue to move forward, but we have to look at it. We just cannot take money or put more burdens. We have very limited with our revenues, but also in our bonding capacity. So, we have a lot of things we have to take into consideration to make this happen. It's not easy.
If I could just add a little bit to that, particularly if you look at the I-5 bridge, we committed $1 billion to that. We by virtue of that, in Oregon doing that, we brought in money from the federal government, substantial, it's over $600 million so far. And we've got an increasing commitment. The dollars go up in that case too to culverts. And that is a U.S. Supreme Court ruling. So we don't want, that's another obligation we have. So we can't jeopardize the investment in culverts going forward or the I-5 bridge. Because there's so much dependent upon those particular activities and their commitments, right? And there are commitments not just among our stakeholders, or commitments with the state of Oregon, with the federal government, that we're going to live up to those requirements. So moving money around would only jeopardize our ability to fulfill those two requirements for I-5 bridge and for the culverts.
What are you hearing from constituents related to just the news that there are some budget challenges for some of these projects? And now, if I could just sort of tack onto that, the Transportation Commission's proposal to raise the maximum toll on 405 or 167 to sort of address some shortfall. Well,
on that particular one, we put some money in Move Ahead Washington cash towards that project, but the basic premise of 405, 167 was the improvements come from the tolling, right? So if in that particular case, we have to live within what the tolling revenues are going to be. And so we funded the bus rapid transit project, but it looks like we're going to have to delay the other two or three projects that were going to come because the revenues aren't there. And I think that was $250 million more for that BRT project on the east side of the Lake Washington. So we have a solution there, but it means some projects are going to get delayed.
What's your take on the maximum toll increase?
Well, of course, I hear from constituents who just are frustrated in the increase in cost. This it is a variable. I think the commission is tasked with a tough job, and we are using tolling as the ability to do the improvements for those jurisdictions. So it is, it's a give and take type of situation. It's been quite a while since the tolls were reviewed, but it doesn't come without impact, and I think that it's reflective overall of the other piece that we're working on, and that is looking at what are these cost drivers. We have to, we can talk about supply, we can talk about labor, but I think we also have to talk about the regulatory, the permitting, the process within how we go out to bid and how these things are done. There's many other complicated things, and the chair and I have already started that work by meeting with contractors who are building these and things. How do we do this better, quicker to do that? The tolls, unfortunately, are a mechanism that are necessary in order to pay for this project. Always going to be met with resistance, of course, because it is an impact on the people who have to travel that road every day.
So if we could transition to talking about a different mode of transportation, state ferry system. The state ferry system's problems, struggles have been widely reported, and earlier coming into the year, during the legislative preview, there was the sense that there aren't any quick fixes, don't expect any immediate fixes. That was sort of the general sense that I got from the preview. What's your perspective on the ferries and sort of where we are?
Well, we work together and we have a procurement method we're going to be using, and we'll be getting bids on the new ferries sometime later this spring or early summer, and we'll see what those bids are, and we open it up to a nationwide procurement. And I think one of the things that we did this year is we put more money on preservation of the existing ferries, because they're going to be there longer than we anticipated. We made investments of that, and I think you'll see in our budget some other support systems, utilizing Kitsap Transit and Metro to provide more passenger service to Vashon and Kitsap County. So we're trying to. It's really unfortunate, the situation within. Unfortunate is actually isn't a great descriptor of it. It's a bad situation, and we've got to do some things that are not full solutions, but we're going to do some things to try to alleviate the worst of things by using other methods to address the situation.
Agree 100%. Our approach on this varies a little. But our commitment is unified in what we've done in this budget process this year, and what we've continued to do over the last several years, especially with workforce development. We looked at stuff, and we want to make sure that the existing fleet is maintained. So you'll see in our budget this year that we're making sure those funds are there for maintenance and preservation. The procurement will be very interesting. The biggest thing that's happening is the cost drivers. It's the same thing. The process we started back in 2018, 2019, when we first started working together on this, we had a pathway. We altered that by going to electrification, to converting to hybrid ferries. The costs have doubled. The time has increased. Our local boat builders, we don't have as much access that we once did to a huge shipyard in the Seattle region. Our caucus has some different ideas. We've put forth a bill to expedite things in the sense that it should be treated more like an emergency. I think that the people that are being impacted by this in the state, it's huge. And so we are presenting, and we're just starting to have conversations that, how do we treat this more as an emergency? And maybe that is to look at the type of boats that we are building today, looking back in the future to what we did with the diesel electric boats. How can we do this as quick as we can, as most cost effective, to get boats in the water now while we continue on this path towards electrification and the things that we're doing, and maybe it's just a matter of reprioritizing. At least that's our approach to it. We haven't really had a lot of time to discuss that policy aspect just because of the immediate need for what we have to do today on the ferries, which is what we're in agreement on.
And just briefly, I say briefly, I'm not sure if this will be a brief answer or not, on the ferries, the staffing issues related to retraining and then preparing for the retiring, the waves of retirement that are happening. It seems as though it's not possible, or it's not happening, that we can get people into those jobs as quickly as people are leaving the ferries.
We're doing, I think, this was actually one of the key areas that the chair and I discovered and worked on with workforce development. A study, it led to a consultant, led to a lot of recommendations that have been implemented. But it's like everything else. It's like law enforcement, it's like so many different things. This is a very specialized job, and it has so many layers of the different types of things. We're trying to remove those barriers. How do you get this person who works in this capacity to be able to have a quicker route to get there? But due to Coast Guard requirements and maritime, it takes time. But we are seeing some progress there, not to the extent that we would like, but we are making some steps there.
So so for whatever reason, I guess maybe it's just how business was done before. This all started when Rep. Barkis and I looked at overtime, and the numbers were outstanding about how much money was being spent on overtime. And so we commissioned a study that came back with the good expertise from the consultant we hired about some of the practices that had been undone. So I'll give you one example. The ferry system, maybe it was because of what the legislature did, only staffed for what was minimum for the Coast Guard. They didn't take into account holidays, time off for vacation, sick leave. So they were in a predicament where automatically you have to use overtime in order to be able to sail. If anybody missed a ship because they were sick, then the vessel couldn't run. So, or someone had to be brought in on overtime. So I think we've done a great job, really, of initiatives in this whole area with workforce, making it more possible, bringing in younger people, more reflective of the community, taking a look at what all the requirements are, setting up more training. So, and you'll see that continue in what we're doing. The governor's made some additional requests, and by and large, we'll be funding those as well. But you're right. Some of this is so much of the legacy of how the ferry system has been treated in the past that it's going to take time. We got a vessel problem. We've got a workforce problem that has to. Yeah. It's going to take some time to get, because we don't automatically snap our fingers and say we've got another 150 people to work in the ferry system. We've got to do more than that to make it an attractive position for people to seek as a career.
You've got a speed camera bill this year, and I'm curious sort of how it interacts with the other one, and also what was the rationale? What brought you to the speed cameras issue?
Well, it's the number of people that were, in the case of construction zones, the number of fatalities of workers in construction zones, and this year we'll set a new record for fatalities on our roadways. So, and as Representative Barkis said, we are challenged by having enough troopers. So whether it's permanent or whether it's temporary, we needed to take some action. I spent a good 6 hours out on the freeway in Pierce County with a trooper. I'll tell you, the speeds that people are driving at, sometimes it's like it's a racetrack out there. We have to have mechanisms to try to bring that down and get into a more safe environment for people that are traveling. So speed cameras, I wish we didn't have to use them, but with the situation we're in and with especially with the construction zone, that was my bill this year, we have to institute those things because we're also trying to get construction workers to work on our highways, right? And it's dangerous. And we have to do the work when there is still traffic on the system.
We have to, within the legislature, within our means in this arena, is to assure that we have the safest roadways possible. That's to make sure they're maintained properly. That's to make sure we have the Washington State Patrol and the troopers. We have focused an inordinate amount of time trying to rebuild the ranks of the Washington State Patrol, and we have a long way to go. We're still 260 some odd troopers short. We have 120 up for retirement, so we just passed a bill a couple days ago regarding some incentives again. We've been looking at all these different things from increasing class sizes, so that is a function, but it is going to take time to rebuild those ranks. In the meantime, we must take some steps to secure the safety. The Worker Safe Zone Camera bill last year, this was basically a trail bill to clean up some of the policies so we can implement that. There have been a couple other bills. I did have a bill that was looking at a pilot project to work with the State Patrol for a couple of years to see about using that for speed enforcement on our highways. That bill did not move forward. It was originally a proviso. It may come back as a proviso, but I appreciate the chair. We wanted to have the public conversation, which we have had on this, because it brings both emotions, right? No, 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 yes, yes, yes. from my perspective, I want to make sure that it's done right. We utmost in the privacy, utmost in making sure it's used as a tool. But the stats don't lie. I mean, we set a record in 2022. We did again in 2023. We're seeing the numbers still at that pace here early in the 2 months of 2024. Our highways are incredibly dangerous right now, and speed is one of those key factors. So I think that we need to look at all the tools. There's another bill that's moving forward that's a little more expansive. We don't agree with that one quite as much, as you will see in the vote yesterday, but we'll see.
So on that bill too, are we talking about the bill to allow cities and counties
Yes.
to expand?
Yes.
So what's your perspective on that?
Well, it's two parts. It's the same problem whether it's a state highway that runs through a city or whether it's an arterial. The speeding problem still exists, right? And so we wanted to give tools to the local governments where they went through a process to determine the right places for these speed cameras and put more of those cameras out there. And the revenue generated can only go to other traffic safety improvements. So I think that's a good solution. And it follows on from more cameras that we've allowed over a period of years. But I think we've set the standard pretty high that you really the local governments have to justify these cameras. They just can't put them in there. It can't be used as a revenue source other than for traffic safety.
So these bills had near unanimous support, some of the bills, the speed camera legislation, but do you think the public's tracking with you? I mean, these are not generally very popular once implemented.
Well, I think, yes, that has been fun. I think the work zone safety one unanimous, and again this year to support that. I mean, there's agreement upon that. Very split on my proposal on the pilot project. We talked about that because of concerns about revenue and everything else. We were opposed in the vote at this time on the bill for the expansion to the local governments because it does expand beyond just work zones. It expands to a lot of other areas, and I think this is where you start to see the conversation about revenue generators, and it kind of goes back to the red light camera. Remember when we had those red light cameras and we started using them, and then a lot of the cities and jurisdictions pulled them away. I do think there are some good pieces in this bill. I think that it'll continue to work over the next couple of weeks, and hopefully it'll get to a point where we can all agree on it.
So we are basically out of time, but before we go, if you have any closing thoughts, anything we didn't get to that you can briefly.
Well, I think what I failed to mention, and I'll let Barkis maybe comment on this as well. You asked about our approach to the budget. I have a very understanding caucus that understands that there's the state of affairs and the challenges we have. And I get great support from leadership to make tough decisions. This is not easy because people's projects are going to potentially get delayed or cut back in its scope. But I wanted to say that I feel very much supported in this process in order to do the hard things we need to do and keep within our lane, so to speak, on our expenditures so that we can do maybe not as much, but address all the priorities that we have in the state for transportation.
Yeah, I would just say, the reason why it works is because of the collaboration. I think this is still an example in the legislature. The way the chair and I work, the way our caucuses work together on this, we are unified in our approach. It makes tackling these challenges much better. I wish we would do it in more policy areas, but I'm confident with what we're going to be rolling out here in a week or so is something that we can work with and move forward on.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. Again, thank you very much, Representative Barkis, Representative Fye. We appreciate your time.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you.
Join us next week for more in-depth interviews you won't find anywhere else. I'm Mike McClanahan. Thanks for joining us. Have a great week.